Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking a bit about academic writing in this podcast. My name is Rachel. I'm a fourth year media student.
Hi, and I'm Christy. I'm a third year public sociology student.
So I think we're just gonna kind of start by talking a bit about the sort of planning stages before we start writing essays or whatever.
We've been chatting a wee bit about all of the what we really need to be thinking about with academic writing, and I think the planning before you write is a really important aspect of that. Having a clear idea of where your writing is going to go, so you don't end up rambling your way off a cliff. So I
Mhm.
suppose what we discussed about that a bit was you need to understand the question, don't you? You need to look at the question, break it down, and then make a logical structure of the stuff that you want to respond to that question. Would you say that kind of is a way to put it, Rachel?
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially if you've been given lots of different questions, which is very often the case, I know anyway, in sort of MCPA, you have to, it's sort of like picking out the question that makes the most sense to you, first of all, or a concept that you understand best. And then from there, kind of breaking down sort of key terms.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're exactly right. It's stepping back and looking at what's being asked of you and really just trying to break that down. So I think you suggested quite a good method for that here, I think, Rachel, that we shared already about some steps to follow for when you're planning to write. Well, I think you sort of
Yeah,
said, first of all, is analyze the question, which is what you just kind of said there about really what is it asking you. And there's actually a really good, there's a lot of great guides and helpful guides on the, I forget what it's called now, the ELS, the
yeah,
learning service.
yeah,
And they have actually even a glossary of if the title has this word in it, what that means is, so for example, contrast or explain, and that's really, really good, helpful. And then I think you said here about we think already, what do we know about that question? For your first thoughts, you read it and your first thoughts are how much do I know? What could I say right now? And then that kind of leads you to, what don't I know? What do I need to go and get a wee bit more about? Or, what do I need to brush up on my knowledge about?
yeah,
I think then, from that, you can kind of begin to plan a bit of a broad structure of well, these are the main topics, or these are the relevant aspects of this argument, or these are the, relevant theorists or whatever, and just start kind of penciling that out, and I think that's this stage. Everything's really very rough. We're not at this stage of the planning of an essay, you're not really engaging hugely in your academic writing because it's still just planning it and thinking about. I think that gives you the structure with which to write nicely upon. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. That makes sense to me. Yeah, so I think once you've sort of got your broad structure and you think about your theorists and stuff, that's when you sort of can dive into that theory, or sort of read around what it is that you think you still need to know. That's when you kind of would start doing your research, I think, and taking notes down. Kind of, and this is different for everybody, the way that we best kind of take notes, and usually you kind of know yourself, or you'll get to know by the time you need to start writing an essay. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
no, you
No,
you
it was just something that popped into my head briefly there when you were saying about taking notes as well. And an important part of academic writing is making sure when you're taking notes, don't just write things down. Make sure you're noting where you're getting that information from, because we'll
yeah.
go on to discuss it a wee bit later about the importance of referencing. But it's
Mhm.
something that's tripped me up in the past, that I'm like, oh, I found this great point, but I've got it written down. I'm like, where on earth did that come
Yeah,
from? I can't use it. I can't use it if I've just, So I think you'll develop your own style for taking notes, but it's important to always keep on top of organizing those notes and knowing where they came from and being able to effectively reference and such.
yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a process for me as well, I think, because I always did that as well. I'd like write things, or even things like and again we'll talk about this later in referencing, but things like writing down a quote and not writing down the page number. So even though I knew where it was from, I had to go back and try and find the sort of control F is your best friend in that situation, like searching for the quote. But
got the speed reading to see where that comes back up again. But and it happens. Obviously, you and I are talking about it. It's nothing, maybe those that are listening just now, you might do it sometime, but yeah, it's just trying to keep on top of yourself and
yeah.
try and not make too much extra work. I suppose as well, from what you're saying there as well, like the reading and researching, that stage can often mean that you go back into thinking about your plan again.
Yeah.
So, maybe we've sort of analysed the question, thought about what we know, done a bit of reading, and then at that point you're like, oh, actually that kind of maybe changes the direction of my argument, or I think that point will fit in really well further up in my essay or something. And I think you maybe need to be flexible about stepping back, thinking about your plan, thinking again, right, actually, no, this is going to flow better this way, so I'll cut and paste, or I'll remove that bit. And I suppose maybe it's just always constantly stepping back and trying to think about like what are they asking for with this question, and how can I best give myself a structure to write nicely to respond to that. I suppose part of what we're discussing here today is the sort of academic writing and the differences between college and university. So I think I was a direct entrant from college, so I had some experience of the differences. And I think, in college level, you're planning your essay, you're engaging in an argument and such, but I think some of the differences can be in the language that you're expected to use and kind of the sort of vocabulary and such. And again, there's really good guides on the ELS homepage. But how do we look over one that was chatting a wee bit about the academic writing style, and it was saying a lot about you really want to be clear and concise.
Yeah.
Like we said before, you'll have information in your mind and it's super tempting to just like go off on a massive ramble and say everything that because you've spent this time learning it and you want to like show the work you've done. But that's often not what they want. They want, if you can look at a sentence or look at a paragraph and cut it down to be clearer and more concise, that would probably get you better marks rather than 2 paragraphs that are, got tons of information in, but they're a bit rambly. And I think that's something that I've struggled with at times, because I just try and like blur everything out all at once. And that's not really the academic writing they're looking for. So, and I think part of that, it was talking about like using formal language. So like, don't say don't, say not, that's a good example of that. Or, and yeah, I think, that's something maybe you can try and write in that style, but you can also go back and edit, what you've written already. And, so maybe you've written something, read over it and think, no, actually, how can I edit this to sound a little bit more formal?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about that, Rachel?
I mean, I think that's a really good idea. And that's actually something that I didn't come across until I was writing my dissertation. This is, now, I can't actually remember where I saw it, but there's somebody talking about how they kind of start by writing their essay as if they were talking to a friend about it, or not even talking to a friend, but just again writing it really informally, like how you might talk about a topic that you're writing about, and then go back and kind of edit it and make it into sort of a formal essay. So if you are really struggling kind of with academic writing from the get-go, like actually getting ideas, then formulating it into something that looks like an essay, you can always start with it being a bit more informal and then work on it.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good, because I think as well in that using that kind of example, or using that approach, you're going to have a strong argument because it's coming from your thoughts, you're talking informally, and then you build up from that, rather than sometimes I can be bad for like taking academic phrases and just trying to sort of stick them together into a sentence that sounds clever, and it doesn't, because it probably doesn't flow properly, it doesn't make enough sense. So yeah, I think that actually sounds like quite a good approach and helpful thing. That's cool.
I think if we talk a bit about like the sort of different styles of writing, because again, there's an ELS, the Effective Learning Service, they have really, really good resources on like all different sorts of writing, which I think we touched on earlier. So there's obviously different sort of styles of writing, and the kind of writing that you will engage with the most will depend a lot on what you're studying, the division that you're in, and also, I suppose, like individual subject areas as well. But I think one of the ones that I found I had to engage with, and it was actually kind of later on for me, was reflective writing. And I was doing like media and lots of film and public relations essays, so I was kind of more used to the sort of critical essays that you have to do, very academic. So this style of writing was really different for me.
So like just sort of broadly sort of reflective, is that kind of more personal? Would you describe it in that way, or?
Yeah, I think so. It's a lot of it is about kind of looking at whatever it is you're reflecting on. So usually for me it was sort of we had to do a client-based project a couple of times, or we had to kind of reflect on group work, and so you're kind of looking at an event, and you think about how you felt, what your thoughts were, and this is very different, like I said earlier, to the critical essays that you do. So it was a bit like, I don't know, it felt a bit jarring really for me. So
Yeah, I do know what you mean. So it's actually something that's come up. It comes up in the public sociology degree a bit early on, because one aspect of the public sociology is this idea of a student, practitioners as engaged. So really constantly reflecting on, what is it that what's the topic we're talking about, but also who am I, where am I coming from, and how does that influence how I'm understanding and engaging with this? So I guess constantly like looking back at oneself and being like, what am I thinking? Why am I thinking that? And kind of trying to express that, because certainly within the public sociology, there's a kind of understanding of, or a feeling that you can't just be completely objective and completely divorced from the world we live in and the things we're engaging with. And so actually we can use that reflective practice to help us further our critical engagements. I think you're right, is really, really different. And maybe coming from college, it'd be like, oh God, these are all the things we were told not to do in essays,
yeah,
like and talk about yourself and such. I think it's recognizing that it's a sort of different and separate entity, and I think the role that reflective writing plays is about, you personally learning and constantly developing, and then reflecting on that learning and trying to like place it into place with your whole lifelong learning as well, which
yeah,
I actually quite like personally. So I think it's something that feels a little different, but actually I think people should just go for it, just go for it. And I guess that kind of leads us into talking a bit about what the main body of academic writing, the most academic writing I think any of us be engaging in a degree is going to be the critical essays and case studies. They're slightly different, I suppose. They're slightly different insofar as really that, I suppose, the clues in the title, but you critically analyze and evaluate, don't you? The critical essay can go a whole load of different ways. I think again, there's good guides about, thinking about with the title, the words that are going to be in the title or the question are generally a clue to the direction in which your critical essay is going to go, whether it's going to be a discuss or, contrast and compare or evaluate. Those kind of words are likely to pop up, and that'll give you a bit of a direction in which to take your writing.
Like they run events, and you can also go in with essays and have them kind of look over them from a sort of like academic writing standpoint, rather than from a sort of like, is the information you've put in correct? And I always think that's helpful, but again, like breaking down terminology like analyze, evaluate, discuss, there's guidance on that, and that engage with that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that's a good point you said about actually talking to the service themselves. It's not something that I have done. I think they were quite heavily overprescribed this past year. I think with pandemic stuff going on, everyone was like, oh, I'll take any class that's going. Please let me have some human contact.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great point about if you were worried about your academic writing, you could contact the ELS. And I suppose the last kind of point, which in some respects is maybe one of the most important points about academic writing, certainly it's this aspect of academic writing that you could be penalized for and is, you know, a hugely important aspect is referencing. Our main referencing system that's used by QMU is Harvard. Is that
Yeah.
right, Rachel? But I suppose I don't think referencing is difficult. I think an important first part of it is what we discussed earlier about when you're taking your notes. Make sure you write down where you're taking notes from. I think you and I, Rachel and I discussed before this podcast, whenever I write an essay, I have the Write and Cite guide, which again is from the Effective Learning Service. I have that open on my computer the entire time.
And I think like it's not, and like you were saying, it's not difficult in that it's not something you have to kind of memorize. So you've got that guide from QMU specifically that you can access online. So it's not something that really takes up a lot of brain power because you've got your guide like right beside you.
I think it's just important to remember, I suppose. Don't leave it as a last minute job. Make it part of your ongoing writing that you're constantly, you know, referring back to. No, and I think, yeah, maybe sort of summing up a wee bit of what we've discussed here, I suppose, you know, we're thinking about the difference between our university experiences and what the college experience would be. And I suppose it's just, from what we're saying here, it's just being careful and constantly thinking about what am I trying to write, or like what am I meant to be doing. I think all of us can sometimes get that bit that once you start writing, you just kind of get off on one and you just kind of start blethering away a bit. And that's good in a way that, you know, you've got these things in your head, but the academic writing really is always about pulling it back and being like, is this relevant to my question? Is it using, you know, appropriate language? Am I engaging in the correct style of like critical or reflexive? And hugely importantly, am I appropriately referencing what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Other than that, I think all of those things are just, you know, I think like we were saying, they're habits that you'll pick up over time. And there's all these tools to help you with these habits, like, you know, so many guides and such like that, that I don't think it's anything to be scared of. It's just something to, yeah, practice and try, I guess.
Yeah. And especially if you engage in the sort of formative essay that you get as well, that's a really good opportunity to practice these sorts of things.
Yeah, the formative essay, I would definitely engage with that, just to get a bit of an idea of what kind of things do I need to improve on, what do I need to brush up on a bit. Great. Well, I think that's probably all for us today, Rachel. So I would say thank you for our discussion and conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. And I would encourage everyone that's been listening to check out all the other podcasts that are being put up and engage in some of the live seminars, because, yeah, I would recommend getting involved. But thanks very much for today, Rachel. And
thank you.
goodbye. Bye.
Bye.